The German Atomic Failure, a Historical Analysis, September 12, 1944. A ruinous awakening in Berlin. On a crisp September morning in 1944, within the fortified walls of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin, a seismic shockwave of disbelief and dread rippled through the heart of Germany's atomic research program. Dr. Heinrich Volkmann, the esteemed director of the nation's uranium initiative, found his hands trembling as they clutched a sheaf of papers, recently decrypted American intelligence transmissions. The contents of these documents did not merely suggest a rival program, they systematically dismantled the foundational beliefs upon which the German atomic effort had been built. The intelligence painted a stark, horrifying picture. While German scientists had been engrossed in theoretical debates and hampered by scarcity, the United States had not only solved the immense practical challenges of atomic weaponry, but was on the cusp of deploying a functional device, an achievement that would irrevocably alter the course of the war. The specific communication, intercepted from the secretive Los Alamos laboratory and decoded by the sophisticated Operation Bernard network, served as a brutal audit of German scientific progress. For years, Dr. Volkmann and his colleagues, including the celebrated theoretical physicist Professor Werner Heisenberg, had operated under the comforting assumption that German science, the very cradle of modern physics, maintained an unassailable lead. This confidence was rooted in the monumental achievement of Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann, who had first split the uranium atom in a Berlin laboratory in 1938. That breakthrough had seemingly handed the Reich the keys to unimaginable power. Yet the American reports revealed a chasm between theoretical discovery and industrial application that Germany had failed to bridge. Heisenberg's own assessments, delivered to Nazi leadership as recently as 6 months prior, had confidently asserted that constructing an atomic bomb was a Herculean task, likely requiring decades and enrichment facilities of such colossal scale as to be logistically implausible in wartime. The intercepted documents proved this to be a catastrophic miscalculation. The anatomy of a German failure, a tapestry of errors. The American intelligence laid bare a reality that was as humiliating as it was undeniable. The United States had, in fact, constructed those city-sized facilities Heisenberg had deemed impossible. The secret complex at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, was not a mere laboratory, but a sprawling industrial behemoth, employing a workforce of over 75,000 in a dedicated city that consumed more electricity than many of Germany's major urban centers. Similarly, the Hanford site in Washington covered hundreds of square miles and housed production reactors for plutonium, a parallel path to a bomb that German researchers had only vaguely theorized about. Dr. Klaus Riedel, Volkmann's deputy and a former student of the great Max Planck, analyzed the technical specifications with a growing sense of despair. The Americans had overcome critical separation and enrichment problems, such as those in their massive K-25 gaseous diffusion plant, which German teams had struggled with for years using only meager, makeshift equipment. The psychological impact on the German scientists was devastating. They were the intellectual heirs to Einstein, Planck, and Heisenberg, working in institutions that had produced a constellation of Nobel laureates. To realize that their painstaking theoretical work had been eclipsed by American industrial might and organizational efficiency represented a profound professional and existential defeat. The German program, which had begun with every conceivable advantage, first discovery, a brilliant scientific community, and initial access to resources like Czech uranium, had been crippled by a series of self-inflicted wounds. The first critical failure was one of structure and bureaucracy. Unlike the Manhattan Project's unified command under General Leslie Groves and the scientific leadership of J. Robert Oppenheimer, the German effort was a chaotic patchwork of competing fiefdoms. The Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, the SS Ahnenerbe, the Luftwaffe's Technical Office, and the Navy's Research Division all ran parallel and often secretive atomic projects. This created a toxic environment of rivalry between figures like Heisenberg and SS Oberfuhrer Dr. Kurt Diebner, where information was hoarded, resources were duplicated, and progress was stymied by territorial disputes. While American scientists collaborated openly in their desert citadel, German researchers were trapped in a system that incentivized siloed success over national achievement. The second, and perhaps most fatal error, was a profound misjudgment of the project's timeline and resource requirements by the Nazi High Command. Officials like Reich Minister Fritz Todt had decreed that any weapons project requiring more than 2 years to fruition was not worth significant investment, a policy that starved the atomic program of the sustained, massive funding it demanded. Proposals for large-scale enrichment, such as Professor Paul Hartek's early designs for gaseous diffusion, were rejected as too costly and uncertain. The funding allocated to such ventures was a pittance compared to the billions of dollars and vast industrial might. The United States was pouring into its program. In some cases, Germany's entire annual budget for atomic research was less than what the Americans spent on supporting infrastructure at Los Alamos. Compounding these strategic blunders were the relentless practical pressures of a war Germany was losing. Allied strategic bombing campaigns systematically targeted scientific institutions. The Kaiser Wilhelm Institute itself suffered direct hits, scattering research teams, destroying precious experimental data, and halting work for months. Critical equipment became impossible to replace as the war economy prioritized immediate needs like tank and aircraft production. Most crippling of all was the brain drain that began with the rise of the Nazi regime. By expelling and persecuting Jewish scientists, Germany had unwittingly gifted its greatest intellectual assets, minds like Einstein, Szilard, Fermi, and Bohr, to the Allied cause. These men formed the very core of the Manhattan Project, applying their genius to solve the problems their former colleagues in Germany still found insurmountable. The American Colossus, industrial power, transformed into scientific reality. The intelligence that reached Volkmann detailed an undertaking of a scale and ambition that defied German comprehension. The American approach was not that of academic physicists, but of industrialists and engineers. They had treated the atomic bomb not as a complex theoretical puzzle to be solved elegantly, but as a monumental production challenge to be overwhelmed with resources and manpower. The breakthrough moment, unknown to the Germans at the time, had occurred nearly 2 years earlier beneath a squash court at the University of Chicago, where Enrico Fermi achieved the first controlled nuclear chain reaction. This marked the transition from theory to practice. Under Groves's relentless direction, the Americans then erected 3 secret cities dedicated to the bomb. Oak Ridge was a testament to parallel processing, attacking the uranium enrichment problem with both gaseous diffusion and electromagnetic separation simultaneously. The Hanford facility applied DuPont's chemical engineering expertise to plutonium production on an industrial scale. And at Los Alamos, Oppenheimer masterfully orchestrated a symphony of thousands of scientists, engineers, and technicians, forcing theoretical concepts into practical engineering blueprints. The intelligence revealed the most shocking detail. The Americans were not pursuing a single bomb design, but 2. The Little Boy uranium gun-type device and the more complex Fat Man plutonium implosion device represented a hedging of bets that German researchers, arguing over the best theoretical path, could never have conceived. This parallel development guaranteed that even if one approach failed, the other would likely succeed. Furthermore, the Americans had solved critical mass and assembly problems that German theory had deemed intractable, using innovative implosion techniques that married nuclear physics with advanced explosives expertise. A cross-disciplinary collaboration absent in Germany's fragmented research environment. The inevitable cataclysm and its aftermath. The subsequent events, the Trinity test on July 16, 1945, and the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August, served as the final, thunderous validation of the September 1944 intelligence. For the German scientists, many of whom were gathered at a final conference or detained at the British Safehouse Farm Hall, the news was met with a mixture of stunned disbelief and crushing humiliation. The secretly recorded farm hall transcripts captured this moment of reckoning with painful clarity. They had genuinely believed the task to be nearly impossible within the war's time frame, and the reality of American success shattered their scientific worldview. The post-war analysis laid bare the full extent of the German failure. It was a failure born not of a lack of intelligence, but of a flawed philosophy. The Reich had approached the atomic challenge as a series of competitive academic exercises, while the United States had treated it as a singular national industrial project. The German program was plagued by bureaucracy, starved of long-term commitment, and isolated from the practical engineering and industrial base required for such an undertaking. The brain drain had irrevocably transferred their advantage to the enemy. The legacy of this failure is profound. The Manhattan Project established the paradigm of big science, large-scale, government-funded, militarily coordinated research that would go on to define the Cold War, from the space race to the development of computing. The German scientists, their reputations tarnished, often found redemption in championing peaceful nuclear energy and nuclear non-proliferation, their unique perspective lending moral weight to the cause. The story of the German atomic program endures as a timeless cautionary tale. Theoretical brilliance, without the organizational structure, collaborative spirit, and industrial capacity to implement it, is ultimately powerless. It is a lesson in the critical difference between knowing something is possible and having the will and means to make it so. The very institute where Volkmann received the devastating news, now the Max Planck Institute, stands as a symbol of this hard-won wisdom, dedicated to international scientific collaboration for the benefit of humanity. The Reckoning. Echoes of failure in a new world order. The detonations over Japan did not just end the Pacific War, they formally closed the book on the German scientific community's self-perception as the unrivaled masters of physics. The immediate aftermath for Dr. Volkmann and his colleagues was a profound disorientation, a state of professional and existential limbo. They were now men whose life's work had been rendered simultaneously obsolete and monumentally significant, their theoretical frameworks validated by the very enemy whose industrial might had exposed their own practical impotence. The farm hall transcripts provide an intimate, unguarded window into this collective psyche, revealing a group veering between denial, desperate attempts to rationalize their failure, and stark horror at the practical application of their science. The initial reaction to the BBC announcement of the Hiroshima bombing was a near-universal refusal to accept the truth. The German physicists, including Heisenberg, concocted complex theories to explain away the report as Allied propaganda, suggesting it was merely a massive conventional explosion or a radiological weapon. This denial was a defense mechanism, a final, frail bastion against the collapse of their entire professional worldview. As more details filtered in, however, the reality became inescapable. The conversation then pivoted to a frantic, almost comical session of back-of-the-envelope calculations, with Heisenberg attempting to reconstruct the critical mass and bomb design from first principles, as if to prove that, had they only had more time or resources, they too could have achieved this. This exercise, however, only served to highlight the depth of their miscalculations, particularly regarding the efficiency of the implosion method used in the plutonium bomb. For some, like Otto Hahn, the co-discoverer of nuclear fission, the news was not a professional blow, but a moral cataclysm. He felt a direct, personal responsibility for the hundreds of thousands of lives vaporized in an instant. His subsequent depressive breakdown, documented by his concerned colleagues at Farm Hall, symbolized the heavy conscience that would haunt many of these men. The science they had pursued for knowledge and national pride had been perverted into the ultimate instrument of destruction, and the realization that it was his discovery that made it all possible was a burden Hahn carried for the rest of his life. The Cold War legacy, from pariahs to pawns. In the nascent geopolitical landscape of the Cold War, the failed German scientists found themselves in a strange new role: valuable assets. Their knowledge, while insufficient to build a bomb for the Third Reich, was a priceless head start for the victorious powers. The United States, through Operation Paperclip, and the Soviet Union, through its own aggressive recruitment efforts, scrambled to secure the services of these researchers. This post-war competition underscored the final bitter irony. The German scientists became pawns in the very atomic arms race their work had initiated, but which their nation had lost before it even began. Men like von Braun, who worked on rocketry, found fame in America, but the atomic physicists faced a more ambiguous future. While they were valuable, their failure under the Nazi regime also cast a shadow of suspicion, and, in some quarters, contempt. The Allied scientific community, which had once revered Heisenberg, now viewed him and his peers with a mixture of pity and disdain, seeing their efforts as both technically flawed and ethically compromised by their association with the Nazi state. They were often excluded from the most sensitive post-war conferences and collaborations, a stark demotion from their pre-war status as global leaders. The German failure became a foundational case study for a new era of state-sponsored big science. The Manhattan Project had demonstrated a new formula for technological supremacy: a clear national objective, centralized management, virtually unlimited funding, and the integration of academic science with industrial and military engineering. This model was immediately adopted by the superpowers. The Soviet atomic bomb program, accelerated by intelligence from spies like Klaus Fuchs and aided by captured German scientists, replicated the American industrial approach, leading to a successful test by 1949. The space race that followed was run on the same principles. The German model, fragmented, academically insular, and chronically underfunded, was now universally understood to be a recipe for failure in the 20th century's technological arena. Atonement and the peaceful atom. In their later years, many of the German scientists, perhaps seeking redemption or a way to reconcile with their haunted past, became vocal advocates for nuclear arms control and the peaceful use of atomic energy. Their unique position as the fathers of the science who had witnessed its perversion gave them a powerful moral authority. They could speak with credibility about the bomb's horrors while also championing the potential of nuclear power for electricity generation, medical isotopes, and scientific research. Dr. Volkmann, Heisenberg, and others like Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker channeled their energies into the reconstruction of German science, helping to establish institutions like the Max Planck Society, the successor to the Kaiser Wilhelm Society, on a new foundation of international cooperation and ethical responsibility. The very laboratories where they had once raced to build a weapon for the Reich were now dedicated to understanding the fundamental laws of nature for the benefit of all humanity. This transformation was perhaps their most meaningful legacy, a hard-won lesson that scientific inquiry, when divorced from ethical frameworks and collaborative spirit, could lead to ruin, but when guided by them, could illuminate a path forward. Enduring lessons for the modern world. The story of the German atomic program continues to resonate, offering timeless lessons that extend far beyond the history of World War II. It serves as a stark warning about the cost of intellectual intolerance. The brain drain of the 1930s, where Germany purged itself of its Jewish scientific talent, is a powerful object lesson in how prejudice and authoritarianism can cripple a nation's innovative capacity, effectively handing its competitors the keys to future dominance. For contemporary technology sectors, the German failure is a classic study in the perils of poor management and internal competition. The rivalries between the SS, the army, and academic institutes mirror the siloed structures that can plague modern corporations and governments, where departments hoard information and compete rather than collaborate towards a common goal. The American success, by contrast, is a masterclass in project management, demonstrating that a unified vision and a collaborative culture are as critical to innovation as raw intellectual talent. Finally, the saga underscores the fundamental difference between invention and implementation. Germany invented the fundamental science of nuclear fission. America implemented it on an industrial scale. In today's world, where nations and companies compete in fields like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and biotechnology, the lesson is clear. Holding a theoretical or patent lead is meaningless without the ecosystem. The manufacturing capacity, the supply chains, the skilled workforce, and the long-term strategic funding to turn a blueprint into a reality. The German atomic scientists, in their moment of stunned realization in September 1944, learned this lesson too late. Their failure stands as an eternal reminder that in the high-stakes game of technological supremacy, the ability to execute at scale has always been, and will always be, the ultimate determinant of success. The psychological scars and a new scientific identity. The end of the war did not bring peace to the minds of the German scientists. Instead, they entered a period of profound introspection and psychological reckoning. The intercepted reports of 1944 had been a prelude. The reality of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was the full, horrifying symphony. For men like Dr. Volkmann, whose identities were built upon the pedestal of German scientific superiority, the collapse was total. They were forced to confront not just a professional failure, but a moral one. The question that haunted them was no longer, could we have built it? But what would have happened if we had? The world had been spared the spectacle of a Nazi atomic bomb, but this salvation came not from their moral resistance, but from their systemic incompetence, a bitter pill to swallow. This period of soul-searching catalyzed a fundamental shift in the German scientific identity. The pre-war model of the brilliant, solitary theorist operating in a quasi-aristocratic academic institute was dead. In its place, a new ethos began to form, one that embraced collaboration, internationalism, and a deep-seated sense of ethical responsibility. The Max Planck Society, established after the war, explicitly enshrined these principles. Its founding statutes emphasized the duty of the scientist to work for the benefit of humanity, a direct repudiation of the warped science that had served the Nazi war machine. The scientists who remained in Germany became evangelists for this new creed, tirelessly advocating for science as a bridge between nations, not a weapon for their destruction. The geopolitical aftermath, the monopoly that wasn't while the German program had failed, its very existence, and the shocking success of the Manhattan Project, created a new, terrifying dynamic in international relations. The United States emerged from the war believing it held a monopoly on atomic weapons, a monopoly it assumed would last for decades. However, this assumption proved to be another critical miscalculation, one directly influenced by the German experience. The Soviet Union, having witnessed the apocalyptic power of the new weapons and acutely aware of the advanced state of German research, launched its own crash program with paranoid intensity. Stalin understood the lesson the Germans had learned too late. In the modern world, a nation without atomic weapons was a second-rate power, vulnerable to coercion or worse. The Soviets, therefore, did not start from scratch. They leveraged the knowledge of captured German scientists, specialists in uranium metallurgy, isotope separation, and reactor design, and combined it with a Manhattan Project-style mobilization of their entire industrial base. The German failure thus indirectly accelerated the Soviet success, proving that knowledge, even from a defeated program, was a contagion that could not be contained. The American monopoly was broken by 1949, ushering in the 4-decade-long balance of terror that defined the Cold War, the intellectual diaspora and the reshaping of global science. The German brain drain of the 1930s had a second, more profound act in the post-war years. The scientists who had fled Nazi Germany and built the bomb in America did not simply return to their old lives. Instead, they became the founding figures of a new, globalized scientific establishment. Figures like Einstein, Bethe, Teller, and Szilard now held positions of immense influence in American academia, government, and industry. Their impact reshaped the global scientific landscape. They brought with them a European depth of theoretical knowledge, but fused it with the American can-do, practical ethos they had absorbed during the Manhattan Project. They established new fields of study, advised presidents, and became public intellectuals of unprecedented stature. The center of gravity for physics, and for much of advanced science, permanently shifted from Berlin and Göttingen to Princeton, Berkeley, and Caltech. This diaspora ensured that the collaborative, well-funded, and application-driven model of big science became the global standard, a legacy far more enduring than any single weapon. The modern proliferation paradigm today, the ghost of the German atomic program, haunts every non-proliferation negotiation and intelligence assessment. The program serves as the archetype of a threshold nuclear state, one with the scientific knowledge but not the full industrial or political capability to weaponize. Modern intelligence agencies, like the CIA or Mossad, study the German case to understand the warning signs of a nascent nuclear program. The procurement of specific materials, the construction of peculiar facilities, the sudden clustering of certain scientific expertise. The German example illustrates that while it is incredibly difficult to build a reliable, deliverable nuclear arsenal, the fundamental scientific principles discovered nearly a century ago are now indelible parts of human knowledge. The barrier to entry is no longer theoretical physics, but the immense industrial and engineering challenge of enrichment or plutonium production. This is why contemporary proliferation crises, such as those involving Iran or North Korea, focus so intensely on centrifuge technology and reactor fuel cycles, the modern equivalents of the K-25 plant and the Hanford reactors. The world learned from the German failure that preventing proliferation means choking off the industrial pathways, for the scientific knowledge itself can no longer be erased. Final reflection. The two faces of Prometheus. The story of the German atomic program is the modern parable of Prometheus. German science stole the fire of the atom, unlocking a fundamental force of the universe. But unlike the noble Titan, they proved unable to control it, and the fire was taken from them and wielded by others with greater force and consequence. The Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, where this drama began, today stands as the Max Planck Institute for Physics, a world-renowned center for fundamental research. In its quiet corridors and state-of-the-art laboratories, scientists from around the world collaborate on problems from dark matter to quantum gravity. The ghosts of 1944 have been exorcised not by forgetting, but by a conscious and continuous commitment to a different future. The building itself is a monument to the dual nature of scientific discovery. It is the place where the path to Hiroshima was first glimpsed, and it is also the place where that path was ultimately repudiated for a higher calling. The ultimate lesson of Dr. Volkmann's trembling hands and the intercepted reports is that knowledge confers not just power, but an immense and unyielding responsibility. The German scientists possessed the knowledge, but lacked everything else: the resources, the organization, the ethical framework, and in the end, the time. Their failure was a tragic, world-altering accident of history that spared humanity one horror while ushering in another. It stands as a permanent testament to the fact that in the nuclear age, the line between civilization and utter ruin is drawn not by the brilliance of a few, but by the wisdom, restraint, and collective will of all.